What is going on, everybody? It's Julian or Flow Graphics here, and this is the first tutorial in the 7 I'm going to be uploading this week as part of my 20k thank you giveaway. So a highly requested sort of effect was that sort of hologram effect, which I actually did in one of the banners I gave away, where you have sort of a gun scope and it has these really cool sort of holograms, and it's actually pretty simple. It may seem sort of in-depth and sort of complicated, but it's pretty simple when you get down to basics. So what I got here is just my YouTube banner template. This obviously works with any kind of document I could use for a poster, wallpaper, whatever, but I'm just going to do it as a YouTube banner, just for example. And I've just got a gun scope, which I'm going to drag in now, which is just a gun from, I think it's Call of Duty. And it's just sort of like a cutout image of this gun. You could probably just find any sort of gun scope if you simply just Google gun scope. But I'll leave a download to this specific image that I'm using in case you want to use that. So first thing I'll do is just really quickly scale down this scope just so it's the right size, and just make sure it's centered and all that. So all I've got now, I might just quickly rasterize that and just call it scope. So what I've got now is my scope in my scene and my background. So that's all you need to start off with. So first thing, once you have that, what I'm going to do now is just create a new layer and just go on my pen tool, and basically this really depends on what sort of size and shape your scope is, but just pen tool a rough shape that sort of encases the whole inside of your scope, which like sort of goes like that. It doesn't have to be perfect because this will go behind the gun, so all I need to do is just fill this center part. It doesn't matter sort of what's on the edges. I'll first just pick a color that I like, so I think orange, or I'll pick blue actually. I'll go with a nice blue, that'll look good, and then I'll just make a shape from that. And then now I've got this shape here, I'm just going to right click on it, rasterize, and drag it underneath my scope layer. So now I've got this sort of blue black backing behind my scope. So first thing I'll do is just change the blend mode. So there's a couple of blend modes that actually work pretty cool with this effect. I found one that looks pretty nice is Vivid Light. If you go to Vivid Light and then just turn down the opacity, that can look pretty awesome, as well as Overlay. Both look good. It really just depends. I find with this blue color, it actually looks a lot better with Overlay. But if I was to change it to a red, I bet it would look better with Vivid Light. Yeah, so yeah, it does look a little bit better with Vivid Light in red. So it really depends about the color. I'll probably keep it. Actually, Vivid Light doesn't look too bad with this blue. I might make it a little bit more sort of turquoisey blue, and that looks pretty cool. But yeah, so I actually might put it back to Overlay, but Overlay or Vivid Light, either one should look just fine for whatever you're doing. So once you have that sort of base scope down, if you want any sort of little side panels and things coming off, you can always add them. So I can just press Ctrl J on this layer, and then I will get that exact same sort of layer I got. And if you want, you can, I could resize this. I could just get my marquee tool and just simply crop out a shape that I wanted. Otherwise, I just have to literally just make the exact same blue that I did before. I've got it in my thing, and then just set to Overlay, and I'll be fine. But let's say I wanted a panel, down here. So I got that one there. And obviously, if you want to make this effect any stronger, I could just simply duplicate, pressing Ctrl J on this back layer, and it just duplicates that again, and it actually does look a little bit better with the duplicated effect. So I can just have both of them sitting there now for the scope, and it looks quite nice. Something you will need though for at least these floating parts here is a stroke. So what I'm going to do is just get this sort of square layer here, and press Ctrl and click on the thumbnail, which will just bring up a selection around that layer. I'm just going to create a new layer, go to my marquee tool, right click on my screen, and then just go stroke, and that'll just bring up this window here. And what I'm going to do now is actually just make it completely white, and 1 or 2 pixels. I might do 2 pixels, should be fine. And now I've just got this sort of white outline, and I can just set the blend mode to Overlay, and as you can see, it just adds this nice sort of edging around that box, which will just sort of highlight it a bit better and make sure it's nice and visible, which will look nice. So now we have that. We can just sort of do our lighting effects. We've got our base sort of color backings, I guess you could say, down. So we just need to get all of our lighting right and look really, really nice and vibrant. So what I'll do now is I'll just sort of group all of them so they're on a nice layer by themselves, and I'll create a new layer, And getting that sort of same blue color, I will just get a bit of a lighter blue from my base blue. If you're using a red, maybe use an orange, or just sort of like a little bit lighter tint of the color you're using. And I'm just going to go on with the brush tool and make sure my hardness is all the way on 0, and just sort of brush in some light here. So I'll fill in this scope all the way. I'll make sure this layer's all the way on the top of everything, by the way. I might do the same to this little floating thing here, so it's got a nice little glow. And then I'll just sort of roughly outline some of the parts of the gun that would actually have light bouncing back off it. So like these edges here, maybe that. These buttons would have a little bit of light on them. And then these parts there. And then I'm just going to sort of erase the bottom so it sort of fades off like that. And now I've got this glow over the whole thing. As you can see, as I flick through the blend modes, I start to get some cool effects. So like with the other one, with the main part, it really depends on what sort of color, what blend mode looks better. So color can look relatively good. If you just turn down the opacity a little bit, it sort of gives that blue tinge to everything, which just sort of makes that color a little bit nicer. Though there are some other blend modes that can look good. Overlay can look good sometimes. Vivid light tends to look good as well. So I would probably go with vivid light or color. Though vivid light seems to change the color a little bit when you do it, so you may have to readjust your color slightly if you're using vivid light to match the original color of the scope. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is actually just go, I'll go with vivid light. I'll just turn down the opacity a little bit more. And as you can see, if I zoom out a little bit, that's just sort of given that nice little bluey tinge to the gun and just around that other part, which just makes it look a little bit nicer and a little bit more realistic. And one last sort of highlight effect I'll do is like an all white brush, and then I'm just going to go around the edge. Make sure I've got my brush tool selected. Go around the edge of this glass here on the gun. I'll actually use my shift key just to make these nice and straight, these lines. Go around the edge there, and I may even do the same just to these little buttons down here, just to make them pop out a little bit better, and just set it to overlay. And then I could just turn down the opacity a little bit, maybe around 50%, 40%. And that's just going to make those edges pop a little bit more and just make it a little bit brighter and a little bit sort of nicer to look at. So the next thing is, with this sort of floating window we have, we just want to make it so it's got some sort of light that's sort of projecting it out, coming away from the gun. So what I can do now is I could even use the same white brush that I have on that layer that has overlay, and just simply draw in some light that just sort of comes to a point. So you want to get the edges of the cube or the square and just sort of draw in some light that comes to a point on the side of the gun here. So it's very it's sort of hard to notice it now, but when I add some blue in as well, it'll make it a bit more noticeable. So I could even do the same like I did with that vivid the vivid light layer down here, which sort of I got all my highlight effects for. I can sample that same color that I had, this here. I'll turn it back to vivid light, and I'll just turn down the opacity a little bit, and then I can just draw back in that light using that same layer. So I'm just using the exact same layer that I use for my highlights, except I'm just drawing in that nice subtle little glow that's sort of making this cube come back to the gun. And then if you want, again, I could even go in and sort of trace in an outline. So I get my pen tool and just sort of trace in that there. And just sort of trace in that. I might just zoom in a bit here. And that'll do. And then I got this sort of line. Whenever you make a stroke from your pencil, it has to be from your brush. So I just make sure my hardness is all the way down. My size is just 2 pixels. So I'll type in there. And then I'll go back to my pen tool and just stroke that with my brush. And then I've got this outline here now. And then I'll just set that to overlay. And as you can see now, I might just quickly erase just sort of like the end part there. And now I've got this nice, cool sort of glowing outline that sort of makes this square here sort of protrude out from the side, and it looks really awesome. So one more thing is we're just going to do like the text, which is really quite simple. All you have to do is just, I'm just going to get my type tool here. I'll just type flow, and usually overlay on just pure white text seems to look the best. I can just set to here overlay, set to there, and then you sometimes may have to duplicate it and just turn down that second duplicate Just turn down its opacity a little bit to whatever looks good, and it should be like really nice. Another thing is, if I just want to hold control and I click on that little T icon to left of the layer, just make a new layer. And what I can do now is go back to my marquee tool, right click on the screen and go stroke, and then I'll stroke that selection. I actually might stroke it as 1 pixel instead of 2. Just 1, okay. And then I can change the blend mode to overlay, and all that does is just sort of make a little outline around that text, which just sort of makes it pop a little bit more. And with that outline, you may not even need that second duplicate of the original fill, because that outline will make it sort of pop out and stand out a lot more. So that's basically it. If you want to do any more to sort of blend the gun with the scene, what you can actually do is just go along and sort of blend the whole scene with the color of the scope. So I could simply get a nice blue color here. I'll just pick a nice blue and simply just fill in that whole scene, and then maybe change it to hue. And then it's basically just changed all the colors in the scene to that blue. I could maybe turn it down a bit if I didn't want too intense. But you can see it's just changing all those oranges and all those colors in the background to the same color as the gun scope, just sort of all just matches and looks really nice. So that's basically it. Sorry if it's a little bit complicated, but yeah, it's just mainly a lot of blend modes and a lot of really cool color effects. So just remember, get your sort of base layer down with your color. Overlay and vivid light are the 2 best blend modes for your base layer. Then work on all your lighting effects. You can use white brushes with overlay blend mode to sort of give those nice popping areas and that nice bright light, as well as some colored brushes with vivid light and some other blend modes. So that's basically it. I really hope you all enjoyed the tutorial. So have an awesome day, guys. It's been Flow Graphics here. See ya.